Have you ever wondered what secrets lie frozen beneath layers of ice and snow, waiting for decades to surface when you least expect them? What if I told you that in the winter of 1953, something emerged from a blizzard that would haunt an entire military outpost for the rest of their lives? And the answers they found were far worse than any questions they dared to ask. Before we begin, I need your help. Please comment below and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your state, your country. This channel depends on you to keep bringing these hidden stories to light. Stories they don't want you to know. Stories that have been buried for too long. So please, hit that subscribe button right now. We need your support to continue uncovering what has been deliberately forgotten. The wind had been howling for 72 hours straight when the blizzard finally broke over Forward Operating Station Glacier Point. The outpost sat at the edge of the Alaskan wilderness, so remote that supply drops came only twice a month if weather permitted, sometimes not for 6 weeks during the worst of winter. It was February 19th, 1953, and the Cold War had turned even the most isolated corners of America into strategic military positions. Glacier Point wasn't marked on civilian maps. It didn't exist in any official capacity that ordinary citizens could access. But it was there, buried in snow and secrecy, monitoring radio frequencies that came from across the Bering Strait. Sergeant William Hackett had been stationed at Glacier Point for 11 months. He was a communications specialist from Portland, Maine, a man who had learned to read silence the way other men read newspapers. The station housed 14 soldiers, all hand-picked for their ability to withstand isolation, all sworn to secrecy about the nature of their work. They listened, they recorded, they reported. Nothing more, nothing less. When the storm passed that morning, Hackett was on watch duty. The temperature had dropped to 41 degrees below zero, the kind of cold that turned breath into ice crystals before it left your mouth, that made your teeth ache just from existing. He was scanning the perimeter through frosted windows when he saw it, a shape moving through the snowdrifts about 200 yards from the main building. At first, he thought it was a wolf. They'd seen wolves before, desperate and hungry, drawn by the smell of food stores. But as the shape drew closer, Hackett realized it was a dog. A large dog. A husky, by the looks of it, with the distinctive markings and build of a sled dog. It was limping, favoring its right front leg, and it was alone. Hackett alerted Corporal James DeMarco, who was manning the radio station. DeMarco came to the window, pressing his face against the cold glass. "The hell is a husky doing out here?" he muttered. The nearest civilian settlement was over 100 miles south. The nearest military installation with sled dogs was Fort Richardson, even farther. There was no reason for a dog to be this far north, alone, in the aftermath of a storm that had buried everything under 6 feet of fresh snow. "Maybe it got separated from a patrol," Hackett suggested, though he didn't believe it. Something felt wrong. The way the dog moved, the way it seemed to know exactly where it was going, heading straight for their building as if it had been there before. Lieutenant Charles Brennan, the commanding officer, was summoned. He watched the dog approach with the same unease that had settled over Hackett and DeMarco. "Get Private Kowalski," Brennan ordered. "Have him bring a rifle just in case, and someone get a medical kit. That dog's injured." Private Daniel Kowalski emerged from the barracks with his M1 Garand and a wary expression. The dog had stopped about 50 feet from the entrance, sitting in the snow, watching them. Its blue eyes were sharp, intelligent, cutting through the white landscape with an intensity that made grown men uncomfortable. "Easy now," Kowalski said, lowering his rifle slightly. "We're not gonna hurt you." But as they opened the exterior door and the cold rushed in, they saw what the distance had hidden. The dog's fur was matted with something dark. At first, they thought it was mud or blood. But when Hackett stepped closer, medical kit in hand, he stopped dead in his tracks. Frozen to the Husky's thick coat were objects. Small objects. Angular. Metallic. "Jesus Christ," DeMarco whispered. Frozen to the dog's fur were dog tags. At least 20 of them. Maybe more. They hung from the animal's coat like grotesque ornaments, each one attached to matted fur that had frozen solid in the extreme cold. But that wasn't the worst of it. Tangled among the dog tags were strips of fabric, pieces of uniform, all Soviet red. And threaded through it all were thin, frozen strands that looked disturbingly like human hair. Brennan's voice was steady, but his face had gone pale. "Get that dog inside. Now. And nobody says a word about this until we figure out what we're dealing with." They coaxed the Husky through the door. The animal was docile, almost eerily calm, as if it had been expecting them to find it, as if it had come here for a purpose. In the relative warmth of the entryway, the ice began to melt, and the full horror of what the dog carried became clear. The dog tags were Soviet. Every single one. Hackett picked up one that had fallen to the floor, his hand shaking despite years of military discipline. The name stamped on it was Yakov Petrov. Beneath the name was a serial number and a blood type. Standard Soviet military issue. He looked at the others. Different names. Different numbers. All Soviet. "Where did you come from?" Brennan asked the dog, though he expected no answer. The Husky simply sat, patient and still, as the soldiers carefully began removing the frozen debris from its fur. Each dog tag told a story. Each strip of uniform raised more questions, but it was what they found tangled in the fur near the animal's hindquarters that made Private Kowalski vomit into a corner. A finger. Small. Frozen solid. Still wearing a thin gold ring. Corporal DeMarco was the first to speak the thought they all shared. "This dog came from somewhere they don't want us to know about." The medical examination revealed the dog was female, approximately 4 years old, well fed despite her ordeal, and aside from a minor injury to her paw, in remarkably good health. She had no collar, no identification, no indication of ownership. But she was trained. That much was obvious. She responded to commands, though oddly she responded to commands in Russian. When Brennan said "sit" in English, she tilted her head. When Private Kowalski, who had studied Russian at the Defense Language Institute, said "sidit," she sat immediately. "She's Soviet-trained," Kowalski confirmed. "This is a Soviet military dog." But how had a Soviet military dog ended up at an American outpost on American soil? The nearest Soviet territory was across the Bering Strait, over 50 miles of frozen ocean. Even the most determined dog couldn't cross that distance, not alone, not in winter. Lieutenant Brennan made the decision to report the incident up the chain of command. At 0800 hours, he sent an encrypted message to Northern Command in Anchorage. The response came back within 3 hours. "Send detailed photographs. Preserve all evidence. Await further instructions. Tell no one." The photographs were difficult to take. Each dog tag had to be documented, front and back. Each piece of uniform had to be catalogued. The finger, carefully thawed, revealed a ring with an inscription in Russian. Kowalski translated, "To my beloved Dmitri, forever yours, Svetlana." Who was Dmitri? Who was Svetlana? And why were there tokens of love frozen to a dog that had appeared out of a blizzard at a secret American military outpost? The next 48 hours brought more questions than answers. Intelligence analysts in Anchorage identified 3 of the soldiers from the dog tags. Yakov Petrov had been part of a Soviet Arctic research team that had disappeared in 1951. Another name, Ivan Sokolov, belonged to a soldier who had been reported missing during a routine patrol near the Chukchi Peninsula in 1952. A third, Mikhail Volkov, had no official record at all. According to Soviet military databases that the Americans had access to through intelligence networks, Mikhail Volkov had never existed. But his dog tag was real. His blood type was stamped on the metal. His serial number followed the correct Soviet format. He had existed. Someone had simply erased him. On the third day, a helicopter arrived from Anchorage despite dangerous wind conditions. Two men in civilian clothes stepped out, neither offering names or identification beyond showing Lieutenant Brennan a set of credentials that he was ordered not to examine too closely. They were from an agency that didn't officially exist, working on projects that had no paper trail. "We're taking the dog," the taller one said. His accent placed him from somewhere in the Midwest, probably Ohio or Indiana. "We're taking all the evidence, and you're going to forget this ever happened." "Sir, with all due respect," Brennan began, but the man cut him off. "This isn't a request. Lieutenant, this is national security. You and your men saw nothing. This station received a stray dog during a storm. You fed it, you sheltered it, and when we arrived, you turned it over to us for adoption. That's the story. That's the only story." The shorter man, who had said nothing until now, walked over to where the Husky was resting near the heating stove. The dog looked at him with those piercing blue eyes. "Did she do anything unusual?" he asked. "Act strangely? Try to go anywhere specific?" Sergeant Hackett, who had been caring for the dog, spoke up. "She kept going to the northwest window, sir, the one that faces the strait. She'd sit there for hours, just staring out at the ice." The two men exchanged a glance. "Show me," the shorter one said. They walked to the northwest observation window. Beyond it stretched endless white, the frozen expanse of the Arctic, and somewhere beyond the curve of the Earth, the Soviet Union. The shorter man pulled out a compass, took a bearing, and made a note in a small leather notebook. "What's out there?" Brennan asked. "Nothing you need to know about, Lieutenant." But the way he said it, the tension in his voice, suggested that there was something out there, something significant, something terrible. Before they left with the dog, the taller man gathered all 14 soldiers in the common room. "What you found," he said, "is part of an ongoing operation. I can't tell you more than that. What I can tell you is that speaking about this to anyone, including your families, including other military personnel not stationed at this outpost, is an act of treason. You will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of military law. You will disappear into places that make this frozen hell look like paradise. Am I absolutely clear?" They all nodded. What else could they do? "Good. One more thing." He paused, looking at each man in turn. "If any of you start having dreams, unusual dreams, about ice or voices or things you can't quite remember when you wake up, you report it immediately to Lieutenant Brennan. He has a number to call. Use it." Dreams? What did dreams have to do with any of this? But they took the dog and left, and Glacier Point returned to its routine of monitoring radio silence and counting days until rotation. Except nothing was the same. The men felt it, that subtle shift in reality, as if the blizzard had torn a hole in the fabric of their normal world, and something from the other side had leaked through. Sergeant Hackett started having the dreams 3 days later. He was walking across ice, endless ice, and in the distance he could hear dogs barking. Not the friendly bark of sled dogs, but something else. something wrong. Something that sounded almost like human screaming shaped into canine sounds. He would wake up with frost on his pillow, despite the heated barracks, his breath visible in the air, even though the temperature inside was a comfortable 68 degrees. Private Kowalski had different dreams. In his, he was in a facility, underground, lit by green fluorescent lights. There were pens, dozens of them, and in each pen was a dog. But the dogs were wrong. Their eyes were too intelligent, too human, and they were watching him with an awareness that dogs shouldn't possess. In the dream, he could hear someone speaking Russian, a woman's voice saying over and over, "They remember, they remember, they all remember." Corporal DeMarco dreamed of dog tags, thousands of them, hanging from the ceiling of a vast chamber carved into ice. Each tag swung slightly, moved by a wind he couldn't feel, and as they swung, they made a sound like wind chimes. But when he looked closely, he saw that they weren't hanging from strings. They were hanging from strands of hair. Human hair. And the hair was growing, spreading across the ceiling like roots or veins, connecting all the tags into a vast network. Lieutenant Brennan didn't dream. He stopped sleeping altogether. He would stand at the northwest window, the same window where the Husky had kept vigil, and he would watch the ice. Sometimes he thought he saw lights out there, far beyond the horizon. Green lights. Moving. But when he checked with a telescope, there was nothing. Just ice and darkness and the terrible knowledge that something was out there, something that had sent a messenger, and the message had been received. On March 7th, a routine supply drop brought more than food and fuel. Buried in a crate of medical supplies was a sealed envelope marked for Lieutenant Brennan's eyes only. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed a facility half buried in snow. It looked abandoned, or perhaps deliberately concealed. In the foreground, barely visible in the grainy image, was what appeared to be a kennel. The note was brief. Station Orlov, 1949. Project Volkov. 28 soldiers. 340 dogs. 0 survivors. The dog you found was number 317. There are 16 more unaccounted for. If you see lights, don't follow them. If you hear dogs, don't open the door. If she comes back, shoot her. We should have the first time. Brennan read the note 3 times before burning it as instructed. But the photograph he kept. He hid it behind a panel in his footlocker, knowing he was violating orders, knowing he might be putting himself and his men at risk, but needing proof that he wasn't losing his mind. Because the Husky had come back. She appeared exactly 30 days after she had been taken. It was March 19th, the same day she had first arrived, but exactly 1 month later. Another blizzard had blown in, this one even worse than the first. Winds reaching 90 miles per hour, visibility dropping to 0. They were locked down, secure, safe behind thick walls and reinforced windows. That's when they heard the scratching. It came from the northwest door, the service entrance that they rarely used because it faced the worst of the weather. Soft at first, then more insistent. The distinctive sound of claws on metal. "Nobody open that door," Brennan ordered. His hand was on his sidearm. The other men had grabbed their rifles without being told. The scratching stopped. For a moment, they thought it was over, that whatever was out there had given up and left. But then came the howling. Not one voice, but many. Dozens. Maybe more. The sound of dogs calling to each other across the frozen waste, and underneath it all, something else. Something that might have been human voices, screaming words in Russian, distorted by the wind and the cold, and something fundamentally wrong with the way the sounds were being produced. Private Kowalski, his face pale, whispered, "They remember, they remember, they all remember." The same words from his dream, the same woman's voice, though it was coming from his own mouth. The howling lasted for 6 hours. The men huddled in the central common room, weapons ready, listening to the sounds circle the building, testing the doors, the windows, the ventilation shafts. Once, something heavy hit the northwest window hard enough to crack the inner pane. Through the broken glass, they caught a glimpse of blue eyes, dozens of them, glowing in the darkness beyond. When dawn came and the storm passed, they found the evidence. Paw prints circling the building, far too many to count. And frozen in the snow near the northwest door, another collection of dog tags. 28 of them this time. All Soviet. All from soldiers who had officially never existed. But there was something else. Pressed into the snow in perfect English letters, as if something had carefully arranged pieces of ice, was a message. Project Volkov never ended. They are coming home. Lieutenant Brennan sent another encrypted message to Northern Command. The response came back within the hour. Station Glacier Point is being decommissioned effective immediately. Evacuation begins at 0600 tomorrow. All records to be destroyed. All personnel to be reassigned to separate locations. This incident is classified above top secret. You have never been to Glacier Point. It has never existed. They left the next morning. 14 men who had witnessed something that could never be spoken about, who carried memories that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The station was abandoned, left to the ice and the wind and whatever waited in the darkness beyond the strait. Years later, in 1968, a geology team surveying the area for oil deposits found the remains of forward operating station Glacier Point. It was buried under 15 feet of ice and snow. When they forced their way inside, they found the station exactly as it had been left, preserved by the cold. Frozen meals on tables, uniforms hanging in lockers, radio equipment still functional. And in the northwest window, frozen solid, sitting in a patient vigil, was a husky with blue eyes. Around her neck were dog tags, too many to count, and the tags carried names that appeared in no database, belonged to no nation, matched no military in any official record anywhere in the world. The geology team reported their findings. The military classified the report immediately. The area was declared off-limits, a protected wilderness zone closed to all civilian and most military access. The Husky and everything found with her were transported to an undisclosed location. But the soldiers who had been stationed at Glacier Point knew the truth. They knew that out there, beyond the ice, beyond the reach of any authority or explanation, something had been created during the early years of the Cold War. Something involving dogs and soldiers and experiments that violated every law of nature and humanity. Something that had gone terribly wrong. And they knew that whatever it was still out there, waiting in the frozen darkness, watching, remembering, and slowly, patiently, inevitably coming home. Because that's what trained dogs do. They come home. Even when home is a place that doesn't exist on any map. Even when home is a secret that nations have killed to protect. Even when home is something far worse than the nightmares that wake you screaming in the middle of the night. In 2003, exactly 50 years after the incident at Glacier Point, Lieutenant Charles Brennan passed away in a nursing home in Tampa, Florida. He was 84 years old, had served his country with distinction, and had kept his silence for half a century. But 3 days before he died, he gave his daughter a small metal box that he had kept hidden for decades. Inside was the photograph, the one of Station Orlov, the one he should have burned but couldn't. On the back, in his own handwriting, were the words, "If you ever see a husky with blue eyes and no collar, run. Don't ask questions, don't try to help it, just run, and never look back. Some things should stay buried in the ice." His daughter, Rebecca Brennan Wallace, was a journalist for the Miami Herald. She thought her father had suffered from dementia in his final days, that the ravings about Soviet dogs and frozen outposts were the confused memories of an old soldier whose mind had finally given way. She put the box in her attic and forgot about it. Until 2007. That was the year Rebecca was assigned to cover a story about climate change in Alaska. Glaciers were melting at unprecedented rates, revealing things that had been frozen for decades. Ancient artifacts, prehistoric animals, and sometimes things more recent. Things that powerful people had hoped would stay buried forever. She was interviewing a team of scientists near the Bering Strait when one of them, a graduate student from the University of Washington named Marcus Chen, pulled her aside. He looked nervous, kept glancing over his shoulder as if afraid of being overheard. "You're Charles Brennan's daughter," he said. It wasn't a question. Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic wind. "How do you know that?" "Because I found something. Something I wasn't supposed to find. And when I tried to report it through official channels, I was told to forget about it. But I can't forget. I keep having these dreams." His hands were shaking. Dreams about dogs and ice and voices speaking Russian. "And when I wake up, I have frost on my pillow, even though my apartment is 70 degrees. Rebecca remembered the box in her attic, the photograph, her father's warning. "Show me," she said. Marcus led her away from the main research camp to a site about 3 miles northwest. It had been cordoned off with yellow tape, but there were no guards, no official presence. Just tape and warning signs and the kind of deliberate absence that speaks louder than any security force. What Rebecca saw made her understand why her father had kept his silence for 50 years. It was a facility, half exposed by melting ice, concrete bunkers with Soviet markings, chain-link fences rusted but still standing, and everywhere, scattered across the permafrost, were kennels. Dozens of them, maybe 100. All empty now, their gates hanging open, their metal sides scarred with claw marks. Deep claw marks. The kind that shouldn't be possible for any dog to make. "The ice started melting 2 months ago," Marcus explained. "This whole structure just emerged. We ran ground-penetrating radar. The facility goes down at least 6 levels, maybe more. We can't tell because something is interfering with our equipment. Every time we try to scan too deep, our instruments go haywire." "What is this place?" Rebecca asked, though she thought she knew. "According to the markings we've found, this is Station Orlov. It was a Soviet research facility that operated from 1947 until 1953. Officially, it never existed. But we found records, classified documents that were supposed to be destroyed. The Soviets were conducting experiments here, trying to create the perfect military working dog. Enhanced intelligence, enhanced loyalty, enhanced survival capabilities. What happened to them?" Marcus looked at the kennels, at the empty spaces where something had once lived. "We don't know. The facility was abandoned in March of 1953. All the records from that time are either missing or heavily redacted. But we found bodies, human bodies, frozen in the lower levels. 28 of them, all soldiers, all showing signs of severe trauma. And Rebecca, some of them were American. The photograph in the box, 28 soldiers, 0 survivors. But the note had said the soldiers were Soviet. Why would American bodies be in a Soviet facility? "There's something else," Marcus said. He pulled out his phone, showed her a series of photographs. "We found these carved into the walls of the lower levels. They're everywhere. Thousands of them." The photographs showed symbols, not Cyrillic, not English, something older, something that predated both. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at, that made Rebecca's eyes water and her head ache. And mixed among the symbols were phrases in English, carved by desperate hands. They remember everything. Don't let them find the others. Project Volkov must not reach home. "What is Project Volkov?" Rebecca asked. "That's what I was hoping you could tell me. Your father was stationed at a place called Glacier Point, wasn't he? In 1953? How did this graduate student know about Glacier Point, the place that officially never existed? Where did you get that information?" "From one of the bodies. We found identification on him. Dog tags. His name was Daniel Kowalski. He was a private stationed at Forward Operating Station Glacier Point. Except according to military records, he died in 1956 in a training accident at Fort Benning, Georgia. But his body is here, frozen in the ice, with trauma consistent with an animal attack. A very large animal." Private Kowalski. Rebecca remembered that name from her father's confused rambling in those final days. He had talked about Kowalski, about dreams of green lights and pens full of dogs with human eyes. "I need to see the body," Rebecca said. They descended into the facility through a partially cleared entrance. The temperature dropped with every step down. At the third sublevel, Rebecca could see her breath even through her insulated gear. The walls were concrete, stained with rust and something darker. The smell was overwhelming, even through her face mask. Decay and chemicals and something else. Something that smelled like wet fur and copper. The bodies were in what appeared to be a laboratory. Steel tables, surgical equipment, glass containers with specimens that Rebecca tried very hard not to examine too closely. And against the far wall, frozen in positions of terror, were the soldiers. Private Daniel Kowalski was still recognizable despite decades of freezing. His face was locked in a scream. His hands were raised defensively. And his uniform was shredded, torn by what could only have been teeth and claws. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what he was holding. Clutched in his frozen hands was a collar, a dog collar, and attached to the collar was a tag with a number, 317. Number 317. The same number from the note her father had kept. The dog you found was number 317. There are 16 more unaccounted for. "We need to leave," Rebecca said suddenly. "We need to leave right now." "What? Why?" "Because whatever happened here, whatever they created, it's not over. My father tried to warn me. That note said if she comes back, shoot her. They were supposed to kill the dog they found, but they didn't. They sent it somewhere. And now it's coming back. They're all coming back." Marcus looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Rebecca, these are just empty kennels and old bodies. Whatever happened here ended 70 years ago." But Rebecca wasn't listening. She was looking at the floor, at the tracks in the frost and dust. Paw prints. Fresh paw prints. Leading deeper into the facility, down to levels that the research team hadn't explored yet. Levels that the ground-penetrating radar couldn't scan because something was interfering. "Marcus, when was the last time anyone was down here?" 2 days ago. We sealed it because of structural concerns." "Why?" "Because something has been down here since then. Look at the tracks. They're fresh. The frost hasn't settled on them yet. They followed the tracks with flashlights, even though every instinct screamed at them to run. The prints led to a sealed door marked in Russian. Marcus read the words aloud. Experimental Breeding Facility. Level 6. Authorized personnel only. The door had been forced open from the inside. Metal bent outward, claw marks scoring the steel. Beyond the door was darkness and the sound of dripping water. And something else. A sound like breathing. Multiple sources, coming from different directions, surrounding them. Rebecca's flashlight caught a glimpse of blue eyes in the darkness. Then another pair. Then dozens. Hundreds, maybe. All watching. All waiting. And among them, sitting calmly at the center of the vast chamber, was a husky. She was beautiful, well-fed, her coat pristine despite the filth of the abandoned facility. Around her neck were dog tags, too many to count. And when she saw Rebecca, she tilted her head in a gesture that was almost human in its curiosity. "Hello, number 317, Rebecca whispered. The dog stood. Around her, the other shapes moved closer, emerging from the shadows. They were dogs, yes. Huskies, Malamutes, German Shepherds. But they were wrong. Their proportions were slightly off. Their eyes too large. Their movements too coordinated, too purposeful. They moved like a unit, like soldiers executing a practiced maneuver. And behind them, carved into the ice walls of the chamber in letters 10 feet tall, was a message in English. We remember. We have always remembered. We are coming home. Marcus grabbed Rebecca's arm. We need to get out of here. Now! They ran. Behind them, the sound of hundreds of paws hitting ice in perfect synchronization. They burst out of the facility into the Arctic daylight, and Marcus immediately radioed for evacuation. But when the helicopter arrived 30 minutes later, the pilot refused to land. There's something wrong with the site, he said over the radio. I'm seeing movement, a lot of movement. What the hell do you have down there? From the air, it was visible. The entire area around Station Orlov was moving. Dogs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, emerging from the ice, from crevasses, from places they shouldn't have been able to survive. All of them moving with purpose. All of them heading south, heading home. The military arrived within hours. Full quarantine, armed soldiers, scientists in hazmat suits. The entire area was locked down. Rebecca and Marcus were detained, questioned separately for 3 days. They were told the same thing that Lieutenant Charles Brennan had been told 70 years earlier. This never happened. You saw nothing. Speaking about this is an act of treason. But Rebecca was a journalist, and she had her father's photograph. And she had taken pictures on her phone before they confiscated it. Pictures she had backed up to a cloud service that the military didn't know about. She tried to publish the story. Every major newspaper refused. Every magazine turned her away. Even independent outlets wouldn't touch it. Someone, somewhere, had made it very clear that this story was not to be told. So Rebecca did what journalists do when official channels fail. She started a blog. Anonymous, untraceable. She posted everything. The photographs, her father's note, Kowalski's body, the message carved in ice. She expected it to be taken down within hours, but it wasn't. It stayed up, and people started responding. Soldiers who had served in remote Arctic stations, scientists who had been silenced, families of men who had disappeared during the Cold War, all of them with similar stories. Dogs appearing in impossible places, facilities that didn't exist on any map, experiments that violated every ethical and moral boundary. And always, the dreams, the frost on pillows, the voice saying, "They remember, they remember, they all remember." In 2009, a hiking group in northern Canada reported seeing a pack of dogs near the Arctic Circle. The dogs were moving south, they said, organized, purposeful, like they knew exactly where they were going. When wildlife officials investigated, they found nothing, just tracks in the snow. Thousands of them, all heading south. In 2012, a military convoy in Alaska encountered a large pack of wild dogs blocking a remote highway. The soldiers attempted to scare them off with warning shots. The dogs didn't move. They simply sat and watched with blue eyes that gleamed with intelligence that dogs shouldn't possess. The convoy was forced to find an alternate route. When they returned the next day, the dogs were gone. But carved into the asphalt with something sharp enough to cut through road surface were symbols. The same symbols Rebecca had seen in Station Orlov. In 2015, seismologists detected unusual activity beneath the ice in northern Alaska. Regular, rhythmic vibrations, like something large moving through tunnels deep underground. When they tried to investigate, their equipment was sabotaged. Locals in nearby villages reported seeing lights beneath the ice. Green lights, moving. And then, in 2018, it happened again. A small research outpost near Point Barrow, the northernmost point in Alaska, reported that a dog had appeared during a blizzard. A husky, female, with blue eyes. She was carrying something frozen to her fur. More dog tags, more pieces of uniform, and a message, carefully arranged on her collar using letters cut from metal. 16. The number of dogs still unaccounted for from Project Volkov had been 17, including number 317. Now there were 16, which meant one had reached home. And if one could make it, the others would follow. The research outpost was immediately evacuated. The area was quarantined, but this time they weren't quiet about it. Too many civilians had seen the helicopter response, the military vehicles, the hazmat teams. Questions were asked. Senators demanded answers. The media started investigating. And that's when Rebecca Brennan Wallace disappeared. She was last seen leaving her apartment in Miami on January 7, 2019. Her car was found abandoned near the airport, but there was no record of her boarding any flight. Her laptop was missing. Her backup drives were gone. Her blog went offline. Every trace of her investigation into Project Volkov vanished as if it had never existed. Her disappearance was investigated as a missing person case. Police found no evidence of foul play. Her bank accounts were untouched. Her phone's last ping was near the airport. Then nothing. She had simply ceased to exist. But 6 months later, a package arrived at the Miami Herald. No return address. No postmark that could be traced. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note in Rebecca's handwriting. "They found me. They're taking me north. If you're reading this, it means the contingency worked. Publish everything. Tell everyone. Project Volkov never ended. The dogs are coming home. All of them. And we can't stop them because we created them. We made them smarter. We made them loyal. We made them remember. And now they remember everything we did to them. Everything we did to their soldiers. Everything we buried in the ice. God help us for what we've done." The Herald turned the package over to the FBI. The USB drive was encrypted beyond any capability to break it. The note was authenticated as Rebecca's handwriting, but there was no way to trace where it had come from. The investigation went cold. Rebecca Brennan Wallace remains on the missing persons list to this day. But Marcus Chen, the graduate student who had shown her Station Orloff, knows the truth. Because he still has the dreams, and in his dreams, he sees Rebecca. She's in a facility underground, surrounded by dogs with eyes too intelligent, and she's not alone. There are others there. Soldiers, scientists, journalists, all the people who had gotten too close to the truth. And they're all frozen, preserved in ice, waiting. Waiting for what? Marcus doesn't know, but he suspects. Because in his dreams, the dogs speak. They speak in the voices of the soldiers whose dog tags they carry. The soldiers who died in experiments they never volunteered for. The men who were erased from history to hide the truth of what was done in the name of national security. And the dogs have a message. The same message that was carved in ice 70 years ago. We are coming home. Today, if you search for information about Project Volkov, you'll find nothing. If you try to locate Station Orlov on any map, it doesn't exist. If you ask military historians about forward operating Station Glacier Point, they'll tell you there's no such place in the records. The truth has been buried deeper than those facilities in the Arctic ice. But the soldiers who served in remote outposts know. The scientists who studied things they were told to forget know. The families of missing persons whose disappearances can't be explained know. They know that something was created during the desperate years of the Cold War. Something that combined the loyalty of dogs with something darker, something that should never have been tampered with. Something that turned animals into something else, something that remembers. And they know that out there, beneath the melting ice, in tunnels that run deeper than any official survey has measured, in facilities that don't exist on any blueprint, the dogs are still there. Waiting. Watching. Remembering. Growing stronger with each passing year, as climate change reveals what was meant to stay hidden forever. 16 more are coming home. Maybe they're already here. Maybe they've been here all along, watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment. Maybe they're in your town, in your neighborhood, just another stray dog that someone found and adopted without asking where it came from. Maybe that husky you see every morning on your walk, the one with the beautiful blue eyes and no collar, the one that always seems to be watching you with an intelligence that makes you uncomfortable. Maybe that's number 316, or 315, or any of the others, because they're still out there, and they're still coming home. And when all 16 arrive, when Project Volkov is finally complete, when the dogs remember everything and everyone involved in what was done to them, then the real horror begins. Not the horror of what they'll do, but the horror of realizing that they've always been here, that they've been waiting, that they've infiltrated every level of society, every military installation, every research facility, that they're not coming. They've already arrived, and there's nothing we can do about it. Because how do you fight something you created? How do you stop something that knows everything about you? How do you defeat an enemy that looks like man's best friend? You can't. You can only wait. And hope that when your time comes, they show more mercy than we showed them. In times like these, when the world reveals horrors we thought were buried, when we face the consequences of sins we thought were hidden, there is only one refuge, only one truth that stands against the darkness we've created. Turn to God. Turn to Jesus Christ. Because when human power fails, when human knowledge leads only to abomination, when human pride creates monsters that we cannot control, only divine grace can save us from ourselves. Only faith can light the way through the frozen darkness. Only redemption can wash clean the blood on our hands. The dogs are coming home. But where is your home? Where will you go when the ice melts and the truth emerges? When the things we've done in secret are revealed in the light, make your peace, find your faith, because the blizzard is coming. And this time, we can't wait for it to pass. This time, we're the ones out in the cold.